My name is Beatrice Clinton. I am 28 years old, and on the night of my sister's wedding, she leaned close, smiling sweetly so no one else could hear, and told me the best gift I could give her would be to disappear. I stood there frozen, knowing I had spent years paying her debts, funding her dreams, sacrificing my own peace so she could stand in that white dress. Yet in that moment, she erased it all with a whisper. Shame burned through me while the crowd cheered around us. But another thought struck harder than the cruelty itself. What if disappearing was exactly what I needed to do? What if stepping back, pulling away every sacrifice, every dollar, every piece of loyalty would uncover the truth she had buried? That night, I made a choice that would tear apart the life she had built and expose secrets even her new husband had never guessed. And I asked myself a question that still lingers. How far can betrayal push a woman before she stops protecting family and starts protecting herself? Stay with me, because what followed after that whisper didn't just ruin her wedding night. It shattered everything she thought she had won. The ballroom glittered with golden lights and crystal glasses. Waiters moved like dancers carrying trays of champagne, while music swelled above the hum of conversation. Relatives clinked glasses and toasted the couple, voices rising in laughter. My sister Selena stood in the center of it all, radiant in her lace gown. Her hand looped through Jonathan's arm as if she had never known struggle. Guests admired her beauty, the flowers the perfect venue, never guessing how much of it had been built with my sacrifices. They didn't know about the loans I had covered, the checks I had written at midnight, the bills I had shifted from her pile to mine so she could keep pretending. She looked untouchable in that moment, her smile wide, her eyes sparkling under the chandelier. And yet just minutes before, she had leaned in close and cut me down with words no one else could hear. The best gift you could give me is to disappear. The audacity left me shaking. I moved through the crowd, clutching my glass of champagne like a shield. I nodded to distant cousins, hugged neighbors, smiled politely at family friends who had known me since childhood. My lips curled into a practiced smile, but inside my chest, a storm raged. The words repeated in my mind, each echo sharper than the last. Disappear. That was what she wanted from me. Not thanks, not acknowledgement, not even the barest scrap of kindness. She wanted me erased from her perfect picture. At one point, Jonathan's gaze landed on me. His smile wavered, confusion flickering across his face. For a second, I thought he might notice the truth hiding in my eyes. I looked away quickly, unwilling to let him see how deep the wound went. I slipped out onto the terrace, the cool air a relief against my flushed skin. The city skyline shimmered in the distance lights, winking across the river. I gripped the railing until my fingers ached, trying to ground myself. My mind raced through the years. The credit cards I had maxed to cover her overdrafts, the late nights I spent patching together her failing accounts, the times I lied to our parents, saying everything was fine when in reality I was drowning so she could keep floating. And now, after all of it, she had wished me away like I was a shadow on her happiness. Behind me, the doors opened and laughter spilled onto the terrace. Guests stepped out with glasses of wine leaning against the railing, swapping stories. I forced a smile, nodding when they greeted me. I had always been the one who played along, who smoothed the edges. Pretend, always pretend. But inside, something shifted. The mask I had worn for so long began to crack. Later, as the band played its last song and the crowd gathered around to cheer for the couple's first dance, I stood at the edge watching. Selena twirled in Jonathan's arms, her gown flowing like water. The applause was thunderous, the love in the room palpable. Yet all I felt was a sharp, cold clarity. She had told me to disappear, and for the first time in my life, I realized I could, but not in the way she imagined. When I finally left the venue, the night air clung heavy to my skin. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step steadier than the last. By the time I reached my car, the decision had settled into my bones. I would stop funding her, stop covering for her, stop sacrificing myself for her illusions. I had given enough. That night, lying in bed with the faint echo of music still pounding in my ears, I whispered to myself that it was over. The silent support, the endless covering up every last piece of it. She had pushed me too far. She had taught me what it meant to lose everything quietly. Now she would learn what it meant when I finally stepped away. I closed my eyes and let the images swirl. Selena in her white dress, Jonathan's confused gaze, my parents clapping with pride as though they had raised a golden child, untouched by consequence. I thought of the little girl version of me, sitting in the shadows while Selena soaked up every light. And I thought of the woman I had become, standing invisible at the edge of her celebration. Something hardened in me, a truth I had been too afraid to face until now. I wasn't the weak one. I wasn't the jealous one. I was the silent revenger, the one who had carried the weight until my shoulders bruised, and now I was ready to put it down. As sleep finally pulled me under, I knew the night had changed me. The path ahead would not be simple, and the storm would only grow louder. But I was no longer afraid. The sacrifices were done. The silence was over. I watched her glowing in the middle of the garden, the laughter circling around her like a crown, and I felt the decision harden inside me. But decisions like that do not come from nowhere. They are carved out of years, out of memories you cannot escape even if you try. Standing there in the shadows, I remembered exactly how we had gotten here, why it had always been Selena in the spotlight while I stayed in the background. I watched her glowing in the middle of the garden, the laughter circling around her like a crown, and I felt the decision harden inside me. But decisions like that do not come from nowhere. They are carved out of years, out of memories you cannot escape even if you try. Standing there in the shadows, I remembered exactly how we had gotten here, why it had always been Selena in the spotlight, while I stayed in the background. I was 6 when I first realized my parents saw her differently. Selena was 8 tall for her age, with hair that always caught the light. At school plays, she got the leading part while I was given a line or two in the chorus. My mother Eleanor would fix her hair and press her dress, cooing about how beautiful she looked while I tugged at my shoes alone. If I complained, my father David would tell me I was strong, that Selena needed the attention more than I did. I started to believe it, though it burned every time. It never stopped. Birthdays meant she got the bigger cake and more expensive presents. Christmas morning, I would unwrap sweaters while she unwrapped dolls that cost 3 times as much. Even when we were teenagers, the pattern stayed the same. My mother made excuses, saying Selena was fragile, she needed encouragement. What she really meant was that Selena deserved to shine, and I was the one who should dim myself down so the room stayed balanced. When I got older, I thought maybe college would be my escape. I was accepted into the MBA program at the University of Texas in Austin. It was my dream. I had always wanted to build something for myself, something that was mine. I remember the letter in my hands, the thrill in my chest. I wanted to shout it from the rooftops. But Selena had just started her undergraduate studies at the same university. Money was tight as it always was. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table one evening, her voice calm but firm, and told me it would be better if I deferred, maybe forever. She said Selena needed the support more. She said I was already strong, that I could wait, that it was my duty as the younger sister. I looked at my father, waiting for him to argue, but he only stared down at his coffee. So I gave up my dream. I went straight into work instead, taking the first analyst job I could find in downtown Austin. The hours were brutal, the pay barely enough, but I saved every dollar I could. When Selena's tuition payments were due, I was there. When she wanted a car to get to classes, I co-signed. When she needed books or rent money, I handed it over. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself once she graduated, once she was on her feet, I would have my chance. But years passed and my chance never came. She breezed through her classes, took trips to New York to shadow designers, bought clothes I could never afford, all with my money. And each time I asked for a little recognition, maybe a simple thank you, she laughed and called me dramatic. I can still hear her voice the day she came home with a new handbag, something designer that cost more than my monthly rent. She swung it in front of me, smiling, and said her friends thought she had the best sister in the world. She meant me, of course, but she never said it to my face. Instead, she turned to our parents, who nodded with approval, and I stood there with an empty bank account and the bitter taste of resentment in my mouth. It wasn't just the money, it was the way they made me invisible. At family dinners, every conversation turned back to Selena, her accomplishments, her charm. My mother bragged about her grades, her looks, her future, while I cut the meat and passed the plates. If I mentioned a promotion or a hard-earned project, they nodded politely and changed the subject. I wanted to scream, to stand on the table and shout that I existed, that I mattered. But I never did. By the time Selena graduated and decided to pursue interior design, I was already too far into the cycle. She opened her small studio with my help, of course, though the paperwork was mostly in my name. She convinced me it was easier that way, that I had the credit score and stability she lacked. I agreed, as I always did, and signed away another piece of myself. Looking back now, I see how naive I was. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought family meant loyalty, even if it cut you open. But standing in that garden, listening to her laugh as if my existence was an inconvenience, I finally understood. She had taken everything I had given and twisted it into proof that I was nothing. The memory that haunted me most came from one rainy afternoon in 2015. I was sitting at my desk at the office, reviewing numbers until my eyes blurred when my phone rang. It was Selena sobbing that her rent was overdue, that she might get evicted. I left work, cashed out what little savings I had, and delivered the money to her apartment. She hugged me, called me her lifesaver, and promised she would pay me back. She never did. That was 8 years ago. 8 years of being the safety net, the backup plan, the invisible benefactor. 8 years of my parents telling me I was strong enough to handle it, while Selena played the victim who always needed saving. And now here we were at the wedding I had quietly financed in pieces, and she had looked me in the eye and told me to disappear. The music from the dance floor drifted toward me, cheerful and bright, clashing with the darkness in my chest. I watched her twirl in Jonathan's arms, her gown fanning out like a cloud, the picture of perfection. No one else saw the cracks, but I did. I saw every lie, every manipulation, every careless betrayal. And I remembered the words my mother once whispered to me when I was 16, when I asked why Selena always came first. She said it softly, as if it were a truth carved in stone. Because Selena needs it more. I clenched my fists, feeling my nails dig into my skin again. No, I needed something too. I needed justice. I needed dignity. For once in my life, I needed to stop being the strong one who waited in silence. As the lights flickered in the distance and the laughter rolled across the lawn, I made a vow to myself. I would not disappear the way she wanted. I would disappear on my own terms, and when I did, I would take everything she had stolen with me. I turned back toward the celebration, the champagne still flowing, the speeches still echoing. Selena's voice carried over the crowd, sharp and triumphant. I stood there in the shadows, my heart pounding, and for the first time in years, I felt the faintest taste of power. And that was the moment I knew this story was not going to end the way she imagined. The music and laughter drifted back toward the pond as I stood still, my heart thudding with the weight of the vow I had just made. But vows without action are nothing more than whispers, and I knew the only way forward was to start pulling the thread that tied me to my sister's glittering world. That thread was money, and my life for the last 8 years had been built around it. On Monday morning, the office felt colder than usual, the kind of sterile air conditioning that made your bones ache. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and tried to focus on the numbers in front of me. The screen blurred. My mind kept replaying her words at the wedding, the sharp look in her eyes. I had spent my 20s in this cubicle at a financial services firm in downtown Austin, grinding through spreadsheets, analyzing trends, surviving on caffeine and stale granola bars, while she floated through life untouched. I tried to drown myself in work, but before long my phone buzzed. It was Grace Thompson from the next desk over, leaning across the divider with her usual sharp expression. She had been with this company for 12 years, and nothing slipped past her. "You look like hell, B." "Long weekend?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." She raised an eyebrow, tapped her pen on her notepad. "You need to be careful. I've been noticing how many personal cosigns you've got under your name. Loans, leases, even that studio space. You know it shows up in your file, right?" My stomach tightened. I knew Grace meant well, but the truth hit harder than she realized. My name was on everything. Rent deposits, car payments, even a business loan for Selena's design studio. I had signed my life away one form at a time, convincing myself I was helping. "I'll be fine," I murmured, but my voice lacked conviction. Grace frowned, shaking her head. "Banks don't care about intentions, B. If something goes wrong, you're the one they'll come after." Her warning settled in my chest like a weight. I returned to my screen, but the numbers meant nothing. All I could see were the checks I had written, the credit cards maxed out in my name, the quiet sacrifices no one had ever noticed. By lunch, I couldn't sit still anymore. I pulled my purse from the drawer and walked the few blocks to the bank. The building loomed over me, all glass and steel, polished like everything in Selena's world. Inside, the smell of paper and ink wrapped around me as I stepped up to the counter and asked to speak with someone about my accounts. The clerk led me to the small office where a man in a crisp suit introduced himself as Leroy Bennett, one of the branch managers. He smiled too easily, but his eyes flickered with something sharper when I explained why I was there. "I just need to confirm every loan or account tied to my Social Security number," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course," he said smoothly, typing into his computer. After a moment, he looked up, his brow creasing. "There are several here. One auto loan, a business line of credit, and a personal loan." I froze. A personal loan. I never signed for a personal loan. There must be some mistake. I only co-signed the auto loan and the business account for my sister's studio. His fingers tapped the keyboard again, his lips pressing into a thin line. "The personal loan is active, $15,000. Payments current. Signed 2 years ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Could I see the paperwork?" He hesitated, but after a few minutes, returned with a folder. I opened it with shaking hands, and there it was. My name scrawled across the bottom of the page, except it wasn't my handwriting. The letters were too round, the signature just close enough to pass. My chest tightened as I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. She had done it. Selena had forged my name, tied me to yet another chain without even asking. I closed the folder slowly, forcing my hands to stop trembling. "Thank you," I said quietly, pushing it back across the desk. Leroy gave me a measured look. "If there's an issue, you should resolve it quickly. Fraud cases can get messy." I nodded, murmured something polite, and left before my legs gave out beneath me. The Texas heat smacked me in the face as I stepped outside, the kind of heat that made the air ripple on the sidewalks. I leaned against the building, sucking in breaths, my pulse racing. She had crossed a line this time. It wasn't just the money, not just the sacrifices, it was my identity, my signature, my future. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out in front of me. Bills, statements, old receipts. Everything I had kept tucked away in neat folders. The numbers stared back at me like a silent accusation. Rent payments, tuition transfers, car notes, studio invoices. Piece by piece, I had bled myself dry. And now I knew she had taken even more without asking. My phone buzzed with a message from her. "Thanks again for covering the florist deposit. It looks gorgeous, doesn't it? Jonathan is so impressed." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. No mention of the loan in my name, no acknowledgement of what she had done. Just another expectation, another assumption that I would keep carrying her. I dropped the phone onto the table, the clatter echoing in my small apartment. My walls were bare, my furniture secondhand, my savings nearly gone. I had given her everything, and all I had left was this crushing weight on my shoulders. But as I sat there tracing the edge of one statement with my fingertip, a new thought began to form. Grace's warning echoed in my head. "If something goes wrong, they'll come after you." Maybe it was time to make something go wrong. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I thought of Selena's face at the wedding, the smug curve of her smile when she told me to disappear. She had no idea that I held the power to make that happen. She had no idea how quickly her world could unravel if I stopped holding it together. For the first time in years, I felt the tiniest spark of control. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. I gathered the papers back into their folders, stacked them neatly, and slid them into the drawer. My hands were steady now, my mind sharper than it had been in days. The music from the wedding still echoed in my memory, but beneath it I could hear something new, a plan, a way out. And maybe, just maybe, a way to make her finally face the consequences she had spent her whole life avoiding. I turned off the light, the room sinking into darkness. Tomorrow, I promised myself I would take the first real step. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, the air in my apartment still heavy from the promise I had made to myself the night before. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, and I knew there was no going back. For years, I had let myself be dragged along by Selena's whims and our parents' excuses, but now the truth was too sharp to ignore. She had crossed into my very identity when she forged my name, and if I stayed silent again, I would lose every last piece of myself. I dressed quickly, pulling on a simple blouse and slacks, the kind of uniform I wore when I wanted to look steady even if I was shaking. Inside, as I drove through Austin traffic, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, I rehearsed what I would say. My sister would deny it, twist it, try to laugh it off, but this time I needed her to see that I knew. Clinton Interiors sat polished and gleaming on South Congress Avenue, its storefront carefully arranged to signal success. Inside, light spilled across curated displays of fabric swatches and high-end furniture catalogs. Selena was bent over a table with a young couple, her laugh lilting, her hands gesturing as if she were weaving magic. She caught sight of me, and for the briefest moment her smile slipped. She wrapped up with the clients quickly and turned to me, her heels clicking across the polished floor. "What are you doing here, Bee?" she asked lightly, though I heard the edge beneath her words. "Don't you have work?" I let my gaze travel around the studio. The place looked expensive, too expensive for the steady trickle of business she had. I turned back to her. "It looks nice, almost like someone has been pouring money into it." Her smile faltered. "You know, clients expect a certain image. It's called investment." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Tell me about the personal loan." Her eyes narrowed. "What loan?" "The one in my name, $15,000, signed 2 years ago." For just a second, fear flashed across her face before she smoothed it away. "You're overreacting," she said with a dismissive laugh. "I just needed a cushion." "It wasn't a big deal." My chest tightened. "You forged my signature." "That's fraud, Selena." Her tone sharpened, her smile gone. "Don't be so dramatic. You've always been good with money. Stronger than me. It made sense for you to help." I clenched my fists at my sides. "It makes sense for me to risk everything while you play the victim again." Tilted her chin, her voice cold. "If you love me, you'll drop it. Don't ruin this for me." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I turned on my heel and walked out before I could say something that would echo forever. The glass door banged shut behind me, the summer heat pressing down as if the world itself wanted to smother me. I didn't plan where I was going, but before long I was parked in front of my parents' familiar brick house in North Austin. The porch swing creaked slightly in the breeze, the flower beds trimmed just as my mother liked them. I climbed the steps, rang the bell, and braced myself. My mother opened the door, surprise lighting her face. "Bea, what a nice surprise. Come in." Inside the house smelled of lemon polish and laundry detergent. My father sat in his recliner, the evening news murmuring from the TV. He muted it when he saw me. "We weren't expecting you, honey." I sat down, clutching my purse as if it might anchor me. "Did you know Selena took out a loan in my name?" Silence pressed down on the room. My mother's smile faltered, her hands tightening on the dish towel she carried. My father shifted, his gaze sliding away. Finally, my mother spoke, her tone careful. "Selena mentioned she might need some help. We assumed you had agreed." I felt my pulse spike. "You assumed without asking me?" My father sighed, rubbing at his temple. "Bea, you've always been stronger. Selena needs more support. She can't handle things the way you can." The familiar refrain hit me like a blow. Always stronger. Always the one to sacrifice. I stood abruptly, the couch cushions sighing under my weight. "I'm not doing this anymore." My mother's voice rose, pleading. "Bea, please. It's her wedding week. Don't make a scene." I stared at her, heat rushing up my neck. All my life I had been told not to make a scene, not to embarrass the family, not to overshadow Selena. For once I wanted to. But instead I walked out, the slam of the front door echoing behind me. The sky was streaked orange and pink as I drove away, my chest tight, my hands shaking on the wheel. That night I spread every document across my kitchen table. Bills, leases, bank statements, receipts, all the proof of what I had carried. The numbers bled together, but the truth stood clear. Without me, her studio would collapse. Without me, she couldn't make rent on her condo or pay off her car. Without me, she had nothing but smoke and mirrors. My phone buzzed with a message from her. "Thanks again for covering the florist deposit. Jonathan says it looks stunning. You really came through. No mention of the forged loan, no apology. Just another demand dressed up as gratitude." I let the phone drop onto the table, its screen glowing until it dimmed. I stared at the papers, my chest aching, and I realized this was the moment everything changed. For once in my life, I would not be the strong one who cleaned up the mess. I would let her world unravel. I would cut every tie she had wrapped around me. And when I was gone, when I truly disappeared, she would finally know what it meant to stand alone. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room as I gathered the papers into neat piles, slid them back into their folders, and placed them in this drawer. My hands were steady. My resolve is sharper than it had ever been. Tomorrow, I thought, turning off the light and sinking into the quiet. Tomorrow I begin. The morning felt different. I woke with a sharp clarity in my chest, as though my body knew the line had already been crossed, and there was no turning back. I moved slowly through my apartment, making coffee, pulling my hair into a neat bun, choosing a navy suit I hardly ever wore. It wasn't for work that day. It was for the first step of disappearing on my own terms. I drove to the bank again, the same branch where I had discovered the forged loan. The lobby buzzed with quiet activity, people shuffling paperwork, the low hum of printers filling the air. I asked to see Leroy Bennett again, and soon I was seated across from him in his polished office. "I would like to close every account in my name that is tied to Clinton. Interiors." I said, my voice steady, though my hands clenched in my lap. He raised his eyebrows. "That business account was opened under your signature. If you close it, operations will halt." "Exactly," I replied. "Close it." He studied me for a moment, perhaps sensing there was a deeper story, but he nodded and tapped at his keyboard. With each keystroke, I felt a weight sliding off me, as if invisible chains were being unlocked one by one. That afternoon, I called the auto loan company and withdrew myself as co-signer, then the credit card company. Each call took patience, each rep requiring me to spell out dates and details. But with each confirmation, I felt something shift. The walls Selena had built with my name began to crack. By evening, I was exhausted but lighter. I stood by the window of my apartment, watching the sun dip low, painting the Austin skyline in orange. I imagined her phone buzzing with notifications, transactions declined, calls she would soon receive. She wouldn't know yet that it was me. The next day, the storm broke. My phone rang mid-morning while I was at my desk. Selena's name flashed across the screen. I stepped into the stairwell to answer. "What did you do?" Her voice was sharp, panicked. "The studio's account is frozen. The florist is calling." "The caterer wants payment." I kept my tone calm. "I closed everything in my name. I won't carry your debts anymore." "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "Do you know how this makes me look?" I almost laughed, though bitterness tightened my throat. "How do you look, Selena? You forged my name on a loan. You've been draining me for years. This is me finally saying no. There was silence, then her voice dropped low and venomous. You'll regret this, B. I hung up before I could hear more. My hand shook as I slid the phone into my pocket, but deep inside I felt something powerful. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Jonathan, her new husband. He asked if I could meet him for coffee. Curiosity and caution tangled inside me, but I agreed. We met the next morning at a cafe near the river. Jonathan looked tired, dark circles under his eyes. He stirred his coffee without drinking. B, I don't want to get between you and Selena, but I need to know what's going on. The florist called me today. She said a payment bounced. Selena told me you're sabotaging her. I held his gaze. I'm not sabotaging anyone. I'm cutting ties. Jonathan, do you even know how your wife has been funding this wedding? This studio frowned. She told me her business was thriving. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. Her business has been running on my back. Loans, accounts, deposits, all in my name. She even forged my signature for $15,000. Jonathan's spoon clattered against his cup. That can't be true. I pulled a copy of the paperwork from my purse, the one I had requested from the bank. I slid it across the table. His eyes widened as he scanned it. She told me her family supported her, he whispered, disbelief coloring his tone. Not like this. For the first time, I saw him not as my sister's husband, but as a man caught in the same web I had been tangled in for years. You need to protect yourself, I said gently. If you keep paying for her lies, you'll drown too. Jonathan sat back, his hand dragging across his face. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied, gathering the papers. Just know the truth. When I walked out of the cafe, the Texas heat pressed down, but I felt strangely cool inside. Selena's empire was cracking not only in money but in trust. Jonathan had seen proof, and that seed of doubt would grow. That night, my parents called. My mother's voice was tight, trembling with anger. What did you do? B. Selena is in tears. She says you're destroying her life. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. No, Mom. I stopped letting her destroy mine. My father's voice joined in stern. You're being cruel. She's your sister. Cruel, I repeated softly. Was it cruel when she forged my signature? When you both looked the other way, silence stretched on the line, only the sound of my mother's sniffles. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly. For once I'm choosing myself. I hung up before they could reply. The following days were chaotic. Selena sent furious texts, voicemails dripping with venom, alternating between begging and threatening. Jonathan stayed silent. My parents sent short messages asking me to reconsider. I ignored them all. At work, Grace noticed the change in me. You look lighter, she said one afternoon, tilting her head, like you finally put something down. I smiled faintly. Maybe I did. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Selena was desperate now, and desperate people make dangerous choices. I had taken away her safety net, and she would fight to get it back. As I walked to my car that evening, the summer sky bruised with purple clouds. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had started unraveling. Now I had to see how far it would go. The days that followed stretched long and tense, like a rubber band pulled too tight. Each morning I woke with the same knot in my stomach, bracing for the next call or message from Selena. My phone lit up at all hours. Sometimes she begged, sometimes she threatened, sometimes she tried sweet words like the child who once cried until she got her way. I ignored most of them, but ignoring her didn't stop the weight. It was everywhere, pressing in on me, reminding me she would not let this end easily. One Thursday evening, I left the office later than usual, the Austin heat still thick in the air. The parking lot was nearly empty, the sky stained pink and orange. I slowed as I saw someone leaning against my car. Selena. My breath caught. She looked immaculate in fitted jeans and a blazer hair perfectly brushed, but her eyes told the truth. Fire burned there, a fury she could no longer mask. We need to talk, she said, her voice sharp. I gripped my keys, unlocked my car, and slid behind the wheel without answering. She yanked open the passenger door and sat down before I could stop her, filling the car with the sickly sweet perfume she loved. You've humiliated me, B, she hissed. The florist is threatening to walk. The caterer wants cash up front. And Jonathan? She stopped, her voice catching for the first time. He's asking questions. Questions I can't answer if you don't fix this. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. Then maybe you should start answering him honestly. She let out a bitter laugh. You don't understand. People are already talking. They say you're jealous that you can't stand to see me happy. I turned, meeting her eyes. Let them talk. Her lips twisted cruelly. You think this makes you strong? You're alone, B. Bitter. At least I have someone. The words struck the way she meant them to. She knew my sore spots. But instead of crumbling, I heard my own voice come steady and low. No, Selena. What I have is freedom. What you have is a house of cards. Her expression hardened. She slammed the door as she got out, heels clicking furiously against the asphalt until she disappeared into the night. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, shaking. My chest ached, but beneath the ache was something stronger. Her desperation was showing. 2 days later, Jonathan called. His voice sounded drained, heavy with something he couldn't name. Can we meet? We met at a quiet diner near the river, the kind with red vinyl booths and endless coffee. He looked older than he had a week ago. His tie was loose, his hair messy, his hands restless around the coffee cup. I don't know what to do, he admitted, voice low. She isn't the woman I thought I married. I stayed quiet, waiting. He ran a hand through his hair. She says you're lying. She swears you're out to destroy her. But I checked the studio's accounts. None of it makes sense. Numbers don't lie. I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the loan documents, the forged signature staring up at us both. I slid it across the table. He scanned the page, his face draining of color. She told me her family supported her, he whispered. I didn't know it was this. There was a raw honesty in his eyes, the look of a man realizing his world was smaller and weaker than he thought. For a moment, I felt almost sorry for him. He was trapped in the same illusion I had lived under for years. You need to protect yourself, I said gently. Don't let her drag you under. His shoulders sagged, his eyes weary. Thank you, B. Leaving the diner, I felt a strange mix of grief and power. My sister's perfect mask was slipping, and I had shown someone else the cracks. But I knew the collapse wouldn't be clean. The following Monday, my boss called me into his office. He shut the door and gestured for me to sit. B, he said carefully, we got a call from Clinton Interiors this morning. Your sister claims you're sabotaging her business, using company resources against her. My stomach twisted. That's not true. He studied me for a moment. I know. I've seen your work. But be careful. If she's desperate enough to drag your name here, she may go further. I thanked him, though my voice shook, and left the office with my chest tight. Selena was escalating. If she couldn't control me with guilt, she would try to ruin me. That evening when I got home, I saw an envelope wedged into my apartment doorframe. My pulse spiked as I pulled it free. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of the forged loan, my name scrawled across it. At the bottom in Selena's handwriting were 3 words. You'll pay for this. My knees weakened and I grabbed the railing to steady myself. Fear surged cold and sharp, but as I stared at the note on my kitchen table, the fear shifted. She wanted me to bend, to crawl back under her control. She thought I would break. She thought the old bee was still here, the one who swallowed her pride and kept paying. But she was wrong. I had already lost too much. My money, my 20s, my peace. I had nothing left to fear losing. And in that empty space, something stronger had room to grow. I stood by the window, the Austin skyline scattered with light. The city hummed below, indifferent to my private war. Selena thought she could crush me with threats, but she didn't see what I had become. I wasn't afraid anymore. And that made me dangerous in a way she would never understand. Because when you've been stripped of everything, you finally learn what you are willing to do to take your life back. Chapter 7. The silence after that moment felt louder than any fight we had ever had. I had thought I had seen the worst of what Selena could do, but I was wrong. The next moves she made showed me just how far she would go, and made it clear how much I would have to harden myself if I wanted to survive her unraveling. Fear and fury lived together in me now, and they took turns steering my days. It began with a small cold notice in my email. I remember the way the subject line stared up at me as if daring me to ignore it. A credit bureau alert. Someone had applied for credit using my social security number. My pulse kicked like a trapped bird. I clicked through and read the flagged application. It had been denied, thank God, but the entry remained and it felt like a scar. I called the bureau right away, heard the scripted sympathy through the line, typed the security words placed fraud alerts. My hands trembled as I made the calls, but beneath the shaking I felt a fierce, unfamiliar steadiness. I was no longer the person who let things happen in silence. Then the calls started. My landlord rang, voice tight with confusion. Your rent is late, he said, and I blinked at him like someone had slapped me. I had paid. I sent him the bank screenshot. He sounded embarrassed, apologizing for the mix-up, then admitted someone had called pretending to be me and claimed the payment was delayed. The idea that someone had used my voice to strip me of my reputation made bile rise in my throat. It was personal in a way theft never is. At the office, Grace noticed before anyone else. She always notices. She is the kind of woman who remembers birthdays and the color of your shoes from a month ago. That morning, she leaned over my desk and said quietly, "You look pale. What is going on?" I almost let the old habit take me, the one where I smile and say everything is fine, but something had changed. I told her the truth. My sister is trying to ruin me. Grace did not gasp or tell me to forgive. She set her hand on my arm the way a nurse steadies an IV line. "Then you fight her," she said. "You do not crawl back." There was a simple authority in those words that steadied me. She did not lecture me about family. She offered a plan of small steps, practical things to document, numbers to call people to notify. Her confidence became armor. On a sticky Saturday, Jonathan called. Hearing him felt odd, like picking up a call from someone on the other side of a thin wall. He sounded exhausted, the easy certainty gone from his voice. "Selena is spiraling," he said. "She keeps blaming you for everything. But I have been looking at the studio books and none of it adds up." I felt a strange sympathy for him. He had been pulled into a story he had not written. We agreed to meet at the diner near the river where the coffee is always too strong and the servers know regulars by name. He arrived with his tie loose and eyes resigned. He asked a dozen small questions, practical ones, the kind that reveal a man trying to make sense of a life upended. "How long have you been supporting her? Did she ever contribute? Does she have any contracts in her own name?" Each answer I gave was a quiet blow. He slid across the paperwork I had printed, and for the first time I watched him see the ledger lines that mapped my years of unpaid sacrifice. When he looked up, his face had lost some of its color. I did not want him to feel complicit or guilty. I wanted him to know the truth, to make a choice for himself. "Protect yourself," I told him softly. "Do not let her drag you under." He nodded, but his hand shook around his coffee. I could see the tension between wanting to help a wife and wanting to preserve oneself. He would have a choice to make, and I did not envy him. A week after the diner, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. For a second, my brain offered calm, rational explanations. Then my chest clenched, and I pushed the door open. Nothing obvious had been taken. Everything looked as it always did. But on the kitchen table sat an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a photo taken from a distance at the diner, a grainy image that had captured me and Jonathan through the window, our heads close in conversation. At the bottom, in Selena's handwriting, there were fierce words, "He is mine, stay away." The note landed in my gut like a punch. For a moment, I imagined all the worst things. Had she been following me for days? Did she know my habits, the route I took to work the baristas I favored? The picture meant she had watched me, had monitored me. My hands shook so hard I had to sit down. Fear curled tight and hot in my chest. Then it turned to a white-hot anger. She wanted me small, terrified, obedient. But I had already run out of things to lose. Losing the fear felt oddly like freedom, a dangerous electric thing. I called the police the next morning. The officer who took my statement was steady and patient, asking precise questions, writing down times and details. He filed the report and told me that stalking and harassment were serious charges. The words were clinical, but they anchored me. For the first time in a long while, I felt the law on my side. I handed over photocopies of the forged loan, the threatening notes, the photo, the list of calls and messages. The clerk stamped the folder and I tucked it under my arm like a shield. Walking out of the station, I felt both lighter and more exposed. The paperwork made it real in a way that private anger never does. I half expected my parents to call and beg me to relent, but their messages came in clipped awkward, asking me to consider the family and the damage a public fight might cause. Old voices, old pressures, but my spine had a new steel in it now. I did not reply at length. I had little time for pleas that sounded like excuses. As the days blurred, Selena's world began to fray in ways that surprised even me. Clients who had once praised her work pulled back after missed invoices and canceled consults. A vendor she relied on called and asked for immediate payment, cutting off services when the check bounced. Walk-ins slowed. Her social media started showing fewer glowing comments and more resentful posts from people who had been left hanging. Word travels fast in our part of town, and people who host dinner parties and school fundraisers talk. The gossip was poisonous, and for once it ran toward her. Jonathan stopped taking her calls in public, and when someone mentioned her name at a neighborhood event, he would look away, ashamed. I caught his gaze once at the grocery store, and I saw the distance in it. He was tired of defending a life built on smoke and mirrors. He was seeing the ledger, the debts, the evidence, and his shoulders were no longer willing to carry the weight. At work, colleagues whispered and offered quiet congratulations the way people do when a long, simmering wrong is exposed. My manager, who had always been fair, came by my desk and said quietly, "You did the right thing." He had seen me cover for family more times than he had words for. He did not lecture me on forgiveness. He recognized a woman who had finally chosen herself, but there were darker moments too. A late-night text from an unknown number with a photo of my car and a single phrase that made my stomach drop. A voicemail with heavy breathing that cut off when I answered. The hits were designed to unnerve, to make me look over my shoulder. They did. I learned to lock doors twice to vary my routes, to check the back seat before getting in. Paranoia is a small price to pay when your life has been weaponized. Through it all, I found myself shifting in ways I did not expect. Where I had once made myself small to protect others, I now found that I could hold space for myself. My shoulders rose higher, my voice was firmer, and I stopped explaining away the imbalance in our home. I allowed myself to feel anger without guilt. Sometimes late at night, I would sit at the kitchen table and rub the place on my palm where I had dug my nails the night of the wedding. The pain was a map of what I had endured and of what I would never endure again. There were moments when doubt crawled back in. What about Mom, I would ask myself. What about the family dinners, the holidays? The ease of pretending everything was sweet. But those were small ghosts compared to the quiet theft of my life. I had been robbed of my time and my savings, of the chance to build something for myself while she elaborated a fantasy on borrowed stability. The knowledge that I had protected her from consequences for so long only hardened my resolve to stop. One evening after a long deposition at the attorney's office, I stood in front of the glass doors of the building and caught my reflection. For the first time in years, I did not look like someone trying to be invisible. My shoulders were squared, my face set, and in my eyes there was a tired, watchful light. I had been the invisible sister for too long. Now I was the woman who had finally stopped giving, who had finally decided to save herself. I climbed into my car and drove home under a sky that was thick with rain. The city lights blurred in streaks across the windshield, and I felt the odd sensation of being both small and enormous at once. The war with Selena was far from over. Cornered people strike hardest, and she had all the cunning of someone who had always been shielded by charm. But for the first time, I was not facing her as the frightened younger sister. I was facing her as a woman who had chosen the shape of her own life. When I pulled into my parking spot and cut the engine, I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. The battle was shifting. The pieces were moving. I was no longer afraid of where it might take me. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I had not felt in years. The sky outside my window was pale blue, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I sat at the table with my coffee cooling between my palms, staring at the notes I had gathered. The police report, the bank statements, the threatening letters. For the first time, I realized I had enough to build a wall of truth taller than any of Selena's lies. Still, part of me trembled. I thought about my parents, about how they always told me to take care of her, to make allowances because she was the fragile one, the gifted one. I thought about the nights I stayed up until 3 a.m, balancing her accounts, while she slept in a king-sized bed I had unknowingly financed. The anger was there steady, but grief sat beside it. It was grief for the sister I wished I had, the sister I sometimes thought I glimpsed when we were little. At work, Grace leaned over my desk. "B, you look different, stronger." I smiled faintly. I finally know what I have to do. That week, I met with an attorney. The office smelled of old leather and coffee. Miss Carter was calm, precise, her glasses balanced on the tip of her nose. She listened as I laid out everything. When I slid the forged loan across the desk, she pressed her lips together. "This is fraud," she said firmly. "And the threats, the impersonations, their harassment. You've done well to document everything." Hearing her words was like breathing air I didn't know I had been deprived of. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't exaggerating. Selena had crossed lines that even family could not excuse. "We'll move carefully," Ms. Carter continued. "She'll try to twist this to turn the story against you. But the evidence is on your side." I left the office with papers clutched to my chest, the city buzzing around me. For once, the noise didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like fuel. Selena must have sensed the shift because her messages grew more frantic. One night, she left a voicemail, her voice cracked. "B, please. You're my sister. Don't do this. We can fix it. Jonathan is still here. We can make it right." For a moment, my chest tightened. But then I remembered the photo she had left on my table, the threats scrawled across it. I remembered her laughter in my car when she called me bitter and alone. I deleted the voicemail. The unraveling grew louder in public, too. Rumors spread through town about bounced checks, unfinished projects, clients left hanging. People whispered in the grocery store, on the church steps, outside the hair salon. I caught fragments every time I ran errands. Poor Jonathan. "Did you hear about the studio? They say she's been lying for years." Jonathan reached out again. We met in the park this time, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes ringed dark. "She's unraveling, B. I can't cover for her anymore." I studied him, wondering if he finally saw the whole truth. You have to protect yourself, I said. She'll drag anyone down who tries to save her. He nodded slowly, like the words finally sank in. That night, I dreamed of our childhood home, of the two of us sitting at the kitchen table, crayons scattered between us. She was drawing castles, her little tongue poking out in concentration. I was helping her stay inside the lines. When I woke, my pillow was damp with tears. But the next morning, resolve returned. I wasn't that little girl anymore, and I couldn't keep coloring inside her lines. 2 weeks later, Ms. Carter called. We're ready to move forward. We'll file and she'll be served. My hands trembled as I hung up. This was it. The point of no return. My heart pounded as I looked out the window at the city pulsing under the evening sky. Selena was about to face something she couldn't charm or manipulate. For years, she had told me the best gift I could give her was to disappear. And in a way, I had. I had disappeared into her needs, her debts, her shadows. But now disappearing meant something else. It meant stepping out of her reach entirely. It meant leaving her to face the wreckage she had built with her own hands. The thought both terrified and steadied me. I knew she would fight. I knew she would scream. I knew she would hate me more than ever. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing myself to shield her. I was bracing myself to let her fall. The morning the papers were filed felt oddly quiet. I woke early, my heart already pounding, and sat by the window as the sun rose over Austin, streaks of orange spilling across the skyline. I told myself this was just another day, but deep down I knew everything had changed. For the first time in my life, Selena would be forced to face consequences she could not twist into someone else's burden. By noon, Ms. Carter called to confirm that Selena had been served. Her tone was calm, almost routine, but to me it felt seismic. I tried to steady my breathing as I pictured my sister's face when she opened that envelope. When the reality of court dates and evidence and witnesses sank in, she would be furious, humiliated, desperate. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice trembled with panic. "B, what have you done? Your sister is devastated. She says you are trying to destroy her." I closed my eyes. "Mom, I am protecting myself. She forged my signature. She stole from me. She threatened me." There was silence on the line and then the familiar sigh. "You two have always been so different. Can't you just forgive?" The old ache stabbed at me, but I forced myself to answer with a steadiness I barely felt. "Forgiveness doesn't erase crime, Mom, not anymore." When I hung up, tears stung my eyes, but beneath them was steel. The cycle of excusing Selena had ended. The first hearing came quickly. I walked into the courthouse in a navy dress, my hands trembling as I clutched the folder of evidence. The hall smelled faintly of old wood and cleaning products. When I spotted Selena across the room, her hair perfectly styled, her expression carefully composed, my chest tightened. But her eyes betrayed her. She looked cornered. Jonathan was there too, sitting apart, his shoulders tense. When his gaze met mine, he gave a small nod. I felt both pity and relief. Inside the courtroom, Selena's attorney painted me as a vindictive sister, a jealous spinster. The words sliced, but I sat tall, my face calm. When Ms. Carter presented the bank statements, the forged loan, the threatening notes, the judge leaned forward, expression sharpening. Selena shifted in her chair, her composure cracking. She glanced at Jonathan, but he didn't look back. For once, the spotlight she loved so much burned her. Leaving the courthouse that afternoon, the sun felt blinding. Grace met me outside, wrapping me in a hug. "You did it, B. You stood up." But inside, I felt shaken. Taking that stand had cost me pieces of myself I didn't know I still clung to. I felt stripped bare, exposed. Yet beneath the trembling was something new, something steady. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions, paperwork, whispers in the community. My parents called less and less, their disappointment heavy but unspoken. At work, my boss quietly assured me my position was safe, that my sister's accusations had no weight. Still, some nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had finally burned the last bridge with my family. The grief was heavy, but I reminded myself that bridges built on lies were never safe to cross. One evening, Jonathan called again. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "I filed for divorce. She doesn't scare me anymore." I sat in silence, absorbing his words. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sorrow for the man who had loved an illusion. "I'm sorry," I finally whispered. "Don't be," he said softly. "You showed me the truth." After we hung up, I stood by my window, watching the city lights shimmer across the river. The war wasn't over. Selena still had claws, and I knew she would use them until the last moment. But something had shifted in me. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for her storm. I was standing in my own calm, letting her fury crash against walls she could no longer tear down. And as the night settled around me, I realized the strangest thing of all. I no longer felt like I was disappearing. I felt like I was finally fully here. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and floor polish the morning the judgment came down. I sat in the second row, hands clasped tight in my lap, trying to slow the wild beat of my heart. Selena sat across the aisle, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear, but she stared straight ahead, jaw locked. The years of charm and control were slipping from her like paint in the rain. The judge's words were calm and final. The loan was fraudulent. The harassment was documented. The damages would be repaid. For once, the story wasn't twisted. The lies weren't louder than the truth. For once, she had to face what she had done. Selena's face crumpled. She didn't cry, not in front of the room, but her hands trembled as she gathered her papers. I watched her shoulders hunch smaller than I had ever seen them. It should have felt like triumph, but what I felt instead was release. Outside, the sun was warm on my skin. Grace was waiting with a smile and a hug so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "You did it, Bea," she whispered. Jonathan walked past us, then his eyes meeting mine briefly. There was no smile, but there was a nod, a kind of silent respect. I knew his own battles were only beginning, but at least he was free of her illusions now. At home that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I once stared at threats scrawled in her handwriting. Only now the table was clean, the air in my apartment still and safe. For years, I had lived under the shadow of my sister's demands, her needs, her chaos. For years, I had disappeared inside her story. Now she was no longer the author of my life. The grief was still there, heavy at times. I had lost my family's approval, perhaps forever. I had lost the dream of a sister who could have stood beside me instead of against me. But grief and freedom can live in the same heart, and slowly the freedom grew louder. I found myself cooking again, humming as I stirred sauces, inviting Grace over for dinner. I walked along the river at dusk, watching the light shimmer and feeling the air move easily in my lungs. I bought a small canvas and paints messy and bright. Not for anyone else, but for me. One evening, I pulled out an old box of photos. There we were, two little girls with gap-toothed smiles, clutching ice cream cones. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull of guilt or duty. I felt compassion for that child version of Selena and compassion for myself. We had both been caught in a cycle too big for us, and I was the one who finally broke it. "The best gift you can give me is to disappear." That was what she had said to me on her wedding day, her voice dripping with cruelty. And in a way, I had disappeared. Not from life, but from her grip, from the role she cast me in without my consent. And in disappearing from her story, I finally appeared on my own. As I sit here now telling you this, I know the battles of family, of betrayal, of justice are never simple. They tear at your heart, they shake your identity, they leave scars. But they also teach you the cost of silence and the power of standing up, even when your voice trembles. I learned that love without respect is not love at all. I learned that sacrifice without acknowledgement is not noble, it is erasure. And I learned that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let someone else fall. I wonder what you think about it. Have you ever carried someone else's burdens until you forgot your own name? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own survival? Share your thoughts with me. I want to know your stories too. And if this one spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your voices matter as much as mine, because in the end, these stories are not just about revenge. They are about reclaiming dignity, finding justice, and remembering that we are allowed to live lives of our own making.